The morning sun had just risen over the golden hills of Aduma when Daniel looked at his reflection in the mirror. His suit was perfect, a fine Italian design, white with gold buttons, tailored to fit his tall, proud frame. Today was the day he had been waiting for all his life, his wedding. The day he would finally prove to everyone that he had made it. As he stood before the mirror, he smiled bitterly. "Who would believe," he whispered, "that the son of a poor widow from the village would one day marry the daughter of a billionaire?" He adjusted his tie and turned to his best man, Chris, who sat at the edge of the bed, grinning. "You look like a king," Chris said. Daniel nodded, his face hardening. "Let them see who I am now, especially her." Chris raised an eyebrow. "You mean your mother?" Daniel gave a short laugh. "Who else? I invited her on purpose. Let her see how far I've come. Let her see that the son she couldn't feed is now dining with kings." Chris frowned, but said nothing. He had known Daniel long enough to understand that success had changed him. The once humble village boy was now a man drunk with pride and resentment. Back in the small village of Irua, Daniel's mother, Mama Grace, received the elegant white envelope with trembling hands. It was sealed with gold, the letters engraved beautifully. Wedding invitation, Daniel and Cynthia. Tears filled her eyes as she traced her son's name. "My son is getting married," she whispered. But behind her smile was pain. Daniel hadn't called her in almost 3 years. The last time they spoke, he told her not to embarrass him by visiting his city home. "You don't fit into my world," he had said. Those words had burned deep into her heart. Her neighbors tried to comfort her, but she said nothing. For years, she had worked herself to the bone, selling firewood, washing clothes, and skipping meals just to send Daniel to school. She believed that education would lift him out of poverty. And it did, but it also took him away from her. She looked at the invitation again. "He still remembers me," she said softly. "Maybe this is God giving me another chance to see my son's joy." Mama Grace didn't have fine clothes or fancy jewelry. Her wrapper was old and her sandals were worn out. But she had one thing: faith. She knelt down that night and prayed. "God, go before me. Let my son remember who he is." The day of the wedding came. The venue was grand, a luxurious hotel in the heart of Lagos. Exotic cars lined the driveway, camera flashes filled the air, and the scent of roses and perfume danced around the guests. Daniel stood proudly beside Cynthia, his bride, smiling for the photographers. Her father, Chief Balogan, was one of the richest men in the country. To Daniel, marrying her was not just about love, it was a symbol of victory, a ticket into the world of the elite. Everything was perfect until one of the ushers whispered to him, "Sir, there's an old woman at the gate asking for you. She says she is your mother." Daniel froze. His smile vanished. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, through clenched teeth, he asked, "What is she wearing?" "Just a faded wrapper and slippers, sir." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Tell her to wait outside. She'll come in later." The usher hesitated. "Sir, the sun is hot. Maybe she—" "I said let her wait." The guests laughed and chatted inside, unaware that outside the gate an old woman stood under the scorching sun, holding a small bag that contained her son's favorite meal, jollof rice and fried plantain wrapped carefully in foil. She smiled weakly at the sound of music coming from inside. "He must be happy," she said. 2 hours passed, then 3. Still she was not allowed in. Some guests who arrived late whispered among themselves, wondering who the poor old woman was. A few even mocked her, taking pictures and laughing. Inside the hall, Daniel laughed loudly with his in-laws. But deep inside, something was burning in his chest. He tried to ignore it. He told himself that this was his moment, not hers, that she would only embarrass him. But just as the pastor was about to pronounce the couple husband and wife, a deep, rhythmic sound filled the air. It wasn't music from the band. It was the sound of rotating blades. Everyone turned their heads toward the sky. A helicopter. It descended slowly above the venue, blowing wind and dust in every direction. The crowd screamed and rushed outside, covering their faces as the helicopter landed gracefully on the hotel lawn. Camera flashes flashed, reporters shouted. Nobody knew who was inside. Then, as the door opened, a woman stepped out, dressed in a stunning gold gown that shimmered under the sun. Around her were two men in dark suits and sunglasses. Behind them followed three well-dressed billionaires, men whose faces appeared regularly on TV and newspapers. The entire place went silent. Daniel blinked, confused. Then his mouth fell open. It was his mother, Mama Grace, the same woman he had left waiting outside under the sun, now walking toward him like royalty. The guests gasped in disbelief. Chief Belogan stood up from the seat. "That's Mama Grace," one of the billionaires said, shaking her hand warmly. "We've been expecting her." The pastor looked lost. "Madame, you are—" Mama Grace smiled softly. "I am Daniel's mother." The crowd erupted in whispers. Cameras zoomed in on her. Even the TV stations broadcasting the wedding turned their focus on the elegant old woman who arrived in a helicopter. Daniel's lips trembled. "Mother, how did you—" Mama Grace looked at him with calm eyes. "You invited me to see your world, Daniel. I came, but not to shame you, my son. I came to remind you that no matter how high you fly, never forget the hands that washed your feet." Tears rolled down Daniel's face as he fell to his knees. "Mama, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to—" She placed her hand on his head. "I know, my child, but pride can blind even the wise. You thought my worth was in my clothes, but my value was in my heart." One of the billionaires stepped forward and smiled. "Mama Grace is one of the most generous women we know. She helped us fund several orphanage projects years ago. We were poor then. She never asked for anything in return. Today, we call her our mother." The crowd gasped again. Daniel's bride covered her mouth in shock. Daniel broke down completely. He held her hands tightly, crying, "I thought I was rich, but I see now that I was poor in heart." Mama Grace lifted his chin. "True wealth is not in money, my son. It is in humility, love, and gratitude." The crowd clapped softly, many with tears in their eyes. The pastor cleared his throat, his voice trembling. "Shall we continue with the vows?" Daniel turned to his bride, wiped his tears, and nodded. But before the ceremony resumed, he took the microphone and faced the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice breaking, "I was ashamed of my mother because she was poor. But today I realize she's richer than all of us. If you have a mother who loves you, you are blessed beyond measure." The crowd stood and applauded. Mama Grace smiled, and for the first time in years, Daniel saw her the way he should have. Not as a poor widow, but as a queen. As the helicopter lifted again that evening, taking Mama Grace and her friends back, Daniel held his wife's hand and whispered, "I will never forget this day." And from that day on, Daniel became a different man, humble, kind, and deeply devoted to his mother. The story of how he invited his poor mother to shame her, but she arrived in a helicopter with billionaires spread across the land, a lesson that echoed for generations. Never look down on the hands that once lifted you.